the people of Gaza, they started fearing starvation more than bombing, being killed by bombing. They actually now, they prefer dying as shaheed, as a martyr, from bombing, rather than dying of starvation and seeing their bodies scaled down from starvation and lack of food.
One of the doctors I was working with in NASA just a few weeks ago has lost 35 kilograms in weight, nearly half his body weight. I remember working with him. I remember on several occasions when we were operating, he almost passed out. Literally, he had to sit down, put his head between his legs because he was fainting because of hunger.
People who were seeking refuge, as Dr. Nick said, in hospitals, they did not feel safe at all from the moment that Ahli Hospital was bombed.
There were no red lines that weren't crossed.
And I could not believe it that the night of Ahli Hospital, we thought that was the end of it. We thought, I know for sure that was the end of it, and I didn't go back to the hospital, both because my father did not let me, and also because we thought that this was the end of it. I cannot imagine that until now they keep bombing hospitals, and they alone. I'm not talking about the Western world. I'm talking about the Arab world. The Arab world is saying. Just want to hold my tongue for that, but they're staying silent, and they're bombing hospitals. Let alone other parts of Gaza.
One of the biggest crimes is that silence,
and the playbook as well. We see the playbook from our side here, looking at those kind of things on the news. It's that eternal playbook of actually. It was a Hamas missile. And then later on, actually, it was something else but deflected or, mispositioned.
There was a footage.
There was an accident. Oh, now it's a one-off. And once that first hospital is bombed and everyone calms down and accepts it.
There was an aerial footage of how the rockets fell on the Al Ahli Hospital with high speed. So that was not like a...
It's that testing ground idea, that, look, let's test the waters, see how the world reacts.
It's the same one that they used for Shireen Abu Akleh, then now
the same narrative they used for Shireen Abu Akleh. So now when we see, for example, we see that people are saying the tide is turning and look, the journalists are now being stronger against Israelis to have on their program. I say, sorry, I'm not really interested in what you're saying now. What were you saying 2 years ago to these journalists, to these Israelis and ambassadors who came on? What were you saying at that point?
But the connivance of the Western governments and the press in perpetuating those lies, and 100%. American officials, UK government, it has been proven that was actually Hamas.
And never formally taking back their statements.
I know.
So just the fact that we can say, it's good. Look, everyone's waking up. I said, but you're not waking up now. You're realizing that now it's okay for you to say certain things. Why were you not active then? It's not about. We say, for example, even we've mentioned silence being a crime, but a lot of them weren't silent. They were actively participating and encouraging this. And still are. And even when we talk about the Arab governments are not necessarily about silence. Some of it's about direct complicity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tareq, I think as much as they are harrowing stories, I feel like it's hard for people here to even comprehend, the magnitude. For us, the things you're describing are things that are so otherworldly to us that, even though it breaks our hearts and it's harrowing, I think we truly just cannot understand what it feels like to be in those shoes, which is, I think it's really good in a way for us to hear these things. And I'm sorry you have to share them because it can't be easy for you to talk about them. But if you don't mind me going even further back, I like the kind of theme we have of talking about things before October 2023 and showing that, things may have escalated, but they weren't great to start with. What kind of things did you see a lot of the consequences of those intermittent bombings in your earlier med school years? Did you get involved in that kind of thing? Was your medical school affected by the infrequent invasions and, bombings and the targetings of medical workers and journalists before October 2023?
Yes, so the last on-ground invasion I remember was in 2014, when we had the 52-day war. And that was the last on-ground invasion I remember. On medical schools, one of them is on the Netzarim corridor, and the other is in Gaza City, which is mine. In all wars, they get bombarded around them, and they get the windows and the medical school equipment, they get damaged and so on. But the scale of this war is much, much more. The damage, but all universities are bombed and destroyed. My mother is the Dean of Research and Higher Studies at Al-Isra University. Al-Isra University was detonated to dust to the ground in the early days of the war. So yeah, the scale of damage to our universities was also present and was also there before October the 7th. And also in the other escalations and other wars before October the 7th, I witnessed also the scale of 2014 war. And I went to the hospital with my father then, Shifa Hospital. And people were also taking refuge in Shifa Hospital, but also even in 2014, a residential building just next to the Shifa Hospital was heavily bombed. And people were injured inside the hospital because of the shrapnels from that bombing. So even before October the 7th, the scale of bombing and breaking the sanctuary of hospitals, educational institutions, mosques, even especially mosques and residential homes as well, was always broken. It's not only in this genocide. And also something that I also would like to mention was that before this current genocide, what we worried the most about, aside of course our lives and all the wars that I've witnessed in Gaza, was that we leave our houses and we know that if we are in the house, we wouldn't be bombed and so on. But if we leave the house and some compact happen next to the house, it will be bombed. And we worry about the houses, we worry about how our families, they worked their whole lives to build a house or to get a land or something. But in this war, in this genocide, from the early days, people are being, until now they were being bombed inside their houses. As I said, the example of my sister's husband's sister family, the 50 members, in the very early days of the war, they were all of them killed. So education institutions, residential homes, mosques, as well as hospitals, all these sanctuary status of these, all these places were broken before October the 7th and during this genocide. Yeah,
it's just more like we're saying, like scale here. It's always like it's stepped up to a point of saying, okay, over all these years, over multiple invasions, we've been basically trying our best to break the will of the Palestinian people, dismantle the infrastructure, see what we can do. And now it's saying, okay, well, we've seen openly genocidal statements. There's no question about it from Israeli government officials, but also to this point where they're saying, we're going to go in, and there's no coming back from this point now. There's no returning to even the level there was before, which was not just in any sense. But there's not even returning to that level now, and we're not hiding that pretense anymore.
I'd like to move the topic to something a little bit kind of more familiar to our recent viewers picking up the news recently, and that is the topic of starvation. Starvation as a weapon of war, not something new to our ears in Palestine, but really the escalation of starvation and the absolute absence now of appropriate nutrition. Beyond even what we were talking about before, where they, that carefully calculated minimal level of nutrition. I'd like to start with yourself, Professor Maynard, just lend your expertise with abdominal pathology. And there's a lot of stuff in the news about, reaching a point after which, even with healthcare, this kind of level of starvation cannot be reversed, or the effects of malnutrition. Can you just, I know it's not easy to talk about, tell us a little bit about the level of starvation, why we might see an absolute exponential increase in deaths from starvation, how that's likely to play out.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that lack of nutrition has been a problem for many, many years in Gaza. But since October the 7th, on my first trip, and when we left in January 24, we were beginning to see signs of malnutrition. Then on my trip in April, May was much worse. But golly, this most recent trip, it was just catastrophic. And it was immediately obvious that within an hour of arriving, I was seeing friends and colleagues, the MAP Gazan staff, other doctors I knew who I hadn't seen for a year, and they'd lost so much weight. It was frightening to see it. So the levels of malnutrition are far, far worse than before. And of course, it's because no aid or food has been allowed in at all in recent months. That was very stark. I'll talk about the pediatric patients who I saw a lot of, and the adult patients who I saw most of. I had a young girl who I operated on who was on pediatric intensive care, so I used to go to the pediatric unit a lot to see her and look after her. But I spent time on the paediatric wards of Nassau Hospital and saw the most appalling signs of malnutrition in newborns. You know, when I arrived there, they'd had four premature newborn babies had died in the preceding 2 or 3 weeks because of lack of formula feed. I saw a little girl called Zainab who will forever be imprinted on my memory. Who was 7 months of age, looked like a newborn. She was being fed with 10% dextrose because they had no formula feed for her. She died 2 weeks after I arrived there. A few days before she died a week after I got there, a few days before she died, some American doctors had arrived at Nassau Hospital. We were chatting and they knew that they'd heard. We'd spread the word we need formula feed. You know, the only way of getting in was through NGOs. And they brought some in their luggage. And every single bottle was confiscated. Every single bottle was taken away by the Israeli border guards.
The target formula feed.
There is nothing else formula feed can be used for other than feeding babies. And the fact that they took it away, and it was only a few days after that, I think, that Zainab died. And you know, that formula feed might have saved her. So it was just awful in the children. And of course, most of my patients were adult patients, and we saw the really devastating effects of malnutrition. They came in very malnourished, so their immune system is suppressed, their tissue healing is very poor, they get infectious complications. So they'd come in with terrible injuries from shrapnel, multiple perforations of the bowel, of the damage to the liver, the pancreas, the duodenum, the stomach. We'd spend hours repairing all these injuries. But because they were so malnourished, because they were so immunosuppressed, their tissues simply couldn't heal. So that all these internal repairs would then leak. They would cause terrible infections. Their metabolic demand was then escalating. And of course, not only were they malnourished coming in, we had no nutritional support to give them. So for the adults in Nassau Hospital, there was no nutrition, full stop. There was no nutrition to give them at all. We managed to find some for limited amounts for the pediatric patients, but none for the adults. So they were even more malnourished because the infections, everything, and we couldn't feed them. So that, of course, led to a lot of them dying. And we were desperate trying to find some nutrition to give them. And even in some of the children, when we could find some nutrition, I remember a patient called Habiba, an 11-year-old beautiful girl who was a patient of mine. She'd had a serious blast injury to her chest from a bomb. It had destroyed, severely damaged her lower esophagus. And obviously that's my main specialty I operate on in the UK. So the paediatric surgeons who had never dealt with that sort of injury asked me to operate. So I spent the whole of one night operating on her, repairing her esophagus. But knowing she couldn't eat or drink for weeks, I put a feeding tube into her jejunum, but we couldn't get the right feed to feed her. And this illustrates the problem you're asking, because we eventually found some enteral nutrition, but she couldn't tolerate it. She got terrible refeeding syndrome, which is, for the non-medical listeners, is when the biochemistry of the blood goes awry, and they need, particularly phosphate, they need a lot of medical intervention in order to feed them. And we wanted to give her intravenous nutrition, but there was no intravenous nutrition available at all. She died after I'd left. She died. I got a very distressing call 5 days after I arrived back in the UK to say that she had died, and that was profoundly upsetting. And this problem is getting worse by the day. Even if there was unlimited feed getting into Gaza now, there'd be many, many more deaths from malnutrition, because it's gone beyond, and so many patients has gone beyond simply needing food. They need acute medical intervention to deal with their severe malnutrition.
I think what's so powerful about hearing from both of you is that often when we hear about the scale of destruction, devastation, starvation, etc., we're talking in numbers and statistics. Look how bad it is, this percent of people, this number of people, etc., etc. But what you two have done so well is tell us the personal stories. These aren't numbers. These are people. These are individuals. These are names. These are real people who are suffering. It's often easy to unintentionally overlook that because you're focusing on the scale of the destruction, but saying actually these are individual people, systematically targeted. Like you mentioned, formula feed being snatched, which has no other purpose. This is very deliberate and systematic. And I wanted to also, similar question to what Ali was asking, also to hear your experiences in that regard regarding the deliberate starvation of the people in Palestine, what you've observed having actually also worked there and being from Palestine, if there's anything further you'd like to share in that regard.
Actually, the people of Gaza, they started fearing starvation more than bombing, being killed by bombing. They actually now, many of my friends were telling me that they prefer dying as shaheed, as a martyr, from bombing rather than dying of starvation and seeing their bodies scaled down from starvation and lack of food, especially their children, their brothers or their sisters. I have a niece and I have a nephew. And all I think about is how their situation is in regards to food. And I always call my sister and I try to note down what they have in regards to food supplies, exactly what they have. And the last time I called her, they only have about a week and a half and 2 weeks worth of supplies. And even though you hear about aid coming in, but like the percentage of aid that comes in from at the border itself, it's not enough, let alone what gets into the market, because on the road from the border to the people or the market, it gets stolen, it gets robbed, it gets sold in the market with massively inflated prices. So the level of starvation that affected my father to go from 15 milligram per deciliter hemoglobin to 10 milligram per deciliter hemoglobin now. And my father is a very healthy, very, very healthy man. But now he is very, very anemic. And as well as my sister, who had many, many health issues during this genocide. And I'm sure my niece and my nephew. But my sister keeps them busy with studying and so on. My niece actually graduated from 3 different schools for her first grade, from 3 different schools, one of which my sister founded during this genocide and got accredited by the Ministry of Education. So the level of starvation is now worrying us more than the bombing, to be honest, because you cannot describe how bad it is, how hurtful it is to see your friends, your family hungry. You can't even eat in peace when you have food, when you're thinking about your family not being able to eat chicken for about now 7 months now. So it's really unspeakable how insane it is for the world to let Gaza, which is the beloved Gaza, die of hunger. It's something that I cannot even begin to understand, let alone live and let alone witness my friends live and my family live in. And the level of starvation that about many children whose images you've seen, of course, in the media, and many adults as well. Of course, this has an effect on pregnant women. I've known many who had miscarriages because of malformations that were detected in about the 2nd trimester. And these were, as the doctors could say with normal scanning, that they were because of malnutrition. And that was before the current trend of starvation that's happening at the moment. That was early into the war, the first year. So that has many effects on many scales. Pregnant women, children, especially children, men as well, like my father and many of our professors. Dr. Khamis Al-Issi, who's a very dear friend of Dr. Nick, he posted 2 pictures of himself a few days on Facebook, comparing himself before this current genocide and the moment, and you cannot imagine how the difference is between his 2 pictures.
I know. I've seen it. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's a live streamed genocide is the term we often hear. We can see it playing out right in front of us.
Yeah, one of the doctors I was working with in NASA just a few weeks ago has lost 35 kilograms in weight, nearly half his body weight. I remember working with him. I remember him on several occasions when we were operating, he almost passed out. Literally, he had to sit down, put his head between his legs because he was fainting because of hunger.
Yeah, personally, my father fainted while he was in the operation room. And he fell on the ground and they took him up, and he had some normal saline infusions and so on. So that, and what makes me furious is that when they talk about us in percentages and in numbers, this makes me furious, honestly, because every single human being in Gaza is an amazing human being. Every single human being in Gaza, they have an amazing story, amazing achievements, amazing academic, professional, normal lives that they live.
Especially when the numbers are used to suggest almost that, like, well, let's compare numbers and see, like,
or to justify.
Oh, well, look, the numbers aren't, there could be worse type of idea. It's like, well,
if we
is it a genocide? Is it a genocide?
That's just nonsense. That's just nonsense.
Absolutely.
The sentiment is there. And if anyone is doubting that sentiment exists elsewhere, or thinks maybe it's a policy of the government alone, there was this recent poll that I'm sure you have seen of Israeli citizens where 79% said they felt unaffected by the current starvation crisis in Gaza. And which is a shocking thing. Even if it was 20 or 30%, I think it would be shocking. But 79%, 4 in 5 people feel unaffected or unmoved by this crisis. And along the West Bank as well, we have for 15, 20 plus years now, stories of settlers poisoning local water supplies, pouring cement into local water supplies, burning plantations, farmland. The idea that there is any intention other than to make the entirety of native Palestine uninhabitable for the indigenous population is, I think...
The new American ambassador to Israel was interviewed literally the other day and denied there was any famine, denied there was any malnutrition there, and said that many of them are fat and could do with being treated with Ozempic, one of the weight loss drugs. I mean...
There's a lot of ridiculous claims, even, only the ones genetic metabolic disorders are dying, the rest of them are healthy. It
would be laughable if it wasn't so evil.
Yeah.
If it wasn't so, like, cartoonishly evil, that it would it's this, and the strength and resilience that we mentioned of the Palestinian people. We've mentioned the people in general, but the volunteers, the journalists, and the particularly the healthcare workers, the medics, the paramedics, the nurses who are, obviously we referenced earlier the Channel 4 documentary, but that opened with that clip of the ambulances, the convoy that was going down and was targeted, and the man who was on the phone to his mother saying that this was his calling, this is his duty, this is, and to think even that specific incident was again one of those incidences where they lied about it at first, then the footage came out and showed just how horrific this is. And this isn't a one-off. This is multiple. This is systematic. This is happening deliberately. It's difficult to even speak about, which is why I think it's so important that you guys have mentioned specific stories and told us the names and what's actually happening on the ground to very real people. And it's not, you've given stories that happen 1-2 months in, or in some cases a week in, or a couple of days in. We're now almost 2 years in, and it's ongoing. And it's not like we're talking, scorched earth type of policy here. It's not about just even killing. It's about making it uninhabitable, drive the population out, and there's no return in sight. It's difficult to even speak about. I think one thing that would also be interesting, because we've touched on some of the forces and ideas that are put out to kind of continue this. Have either of you or the two of you faced any difficulty that you've noticed even while being in the UK in terms of you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be, especially not just doing humanitarian work, being outspoken about it. You shouldn't go there, you shouldn't do this, etc., either directly or indirectly.
Actually, before you answer that, I was thinking this as well. We see a lot of stuff about NHS workers being targeted, about difficulties in expressing political signs for Palestine, despite maybe the ease of displaying political signs for other countries. But you've described 30 workers volunteering to come to Gaza with you, and you're having to actually pick out people because there's so much support. So there's a bit of discrepancy in what we're hearing and what you're saying. How have you found NHS work here as a, publicly pro-Palestinian doctor? And after that, Tareq, how have you found introducing yourself in the NHS as someone from Palestine with these stories?
So I think there's been a huge amount of ground root support in the NHS, shall I say, for the plight of the Gazans and Palestinians. And certainly the majority of everyone I've interacted with, and I can speak about many other colleagues, have been appalled by what's happened. That doesn't mean they're going to stand up and and talk about it. A lot of them are fairly silent about it and just quietly say, yes, it's terrible. I wish they would say more, but I've had very little resistance or antagonism from healthcare workers. I think what's more reprehensible is the senior management of the hospitals and the medical institutions and the associations and the colleges who I think have been unacceptably silent. And I think that's been terrible, actually. They've seen the evidence, they've seen what's going on, how healthcare workers have been targeted in Gaza, and they really should have spoken out. I think that's been reprehensible, I'm afraid, and I'm profoundly disappointed by our medical institutions, our academic institutions, for failing to speak out for this.
I think as well, Tareq, would be good to hear as well if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah, for me, honestly, I can openly say that the support I've received since I've come to the UK is actually remarkable. My first day in Oxford, I sat with Dr. Nick and we have sorted out my placements for my 5th year of medical school. So for me, actually, the support I've been receiving in Oxford in regards to my to completing my degree in medical school is remarkable. I've been given the chance to finish my degree here, and I've been accepted for a master's in surgical science and practice at the University of Oxford with an Oxford Award alongside it as well at St. Peter's College. So this, for me, actually, the support I've been receiving here is really, really remarkable, and I've been given the chance also to speak and participate in several conferences, either online and on the ground in the UK. And also I've been given lectures as well on vaccinations in Gaza, on the situation in Gaza in general, on my personal experience as well. So actually it's been a very good experience for me, and it still is as well. And I'm happy to move forward like this, and I'm getting ready to finish my degree, inshallah, and get my GMC registration and get into foundation.
I think that's
my surgical training here.
What's really good from what you guys have mentioned is actually it's touched on a really good area, which is that disconnect there is between the general public, especially in the healthcare sector, where people will be largely supportive of Palestine. I mean, you'd understand when you see the humanitarian crisis, any human would look at that and say, this is not something I can support in any way whatsoever. So and the disconnect between that and upper management, or for example, there was a story that happened, I can't remember when exactly, maybe perhaps a couple of years ago, of artwork in a London hospital made by Gazan children that was removed after a complaint by a group called Lawyers for Israel. The artwork was removed from that London hospital because of ideas that it might make certain patients feel unsafe. When the Freedom of Information request was put through, there were 0 complaints received about it. So this idea, basically, that's almost an idea that's trying to be pushed that, people aren't supportive of Palestine, when actually that's not the experience we're seeing. People they might not be as vocal as we would hope, but people are generally supportive. I mean, we've looked at if we've seen the numbers even in the pro-Palestine marches, not just in London, the national ones, but all across the country. Recent one that I believe the most recent one, they announced a number of 250,000 people.
And we hit the million march in I think in November or December 2023.
Yeah, it's that the show is incredible, and by no means are we saying this is enough. But the thing is, we can see that there's definitely a disconnect between our government and the policies that are being pushed by the government and what the people on the ground are actually feeling. Well, now we're actually seeing what's more interesting when we say the tide is turning is not the tide is turning from journalists and politicians who are actually very supportive and behind the scenes still do support. I'm talking about what's really interesting. The tide is turning is that, as you mentioned right at the start, Professor Maynard, people are finally waking up to what Gaza is, where it is, who these people are, and what is going on. And people traditionally who's in America, it might be the Republican supporters. In this country, it might be the more right-wing supporters. Even there are coming around to this idea, wait a second, this is not something that we support in our name. This is not something that should be done in our name. And there's a bit of a tide that is turning there. Obviously, we say, that's not enough. What we'd encourage everyone is, of course, firstly, when we're speaking to our communities, is about keeping Palestine in our prayers, praying for an end to this destruction, and praying for justice, not just peace. I say deliberately, not just peace. We say justice, because there's a difference. I've quoted a few times, but I believe it was Martin Luther King said in a letter from Birmingham jail. He said there's a difference between a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, and a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. Because if there was a ceasefire announced tomorrow, which is what everyone's calling for, that wouldn't mean there's justice in Palestine. That would mean there's a level of peace relative to what there is now. And so what we're praying for is we're praying for justice and people who are perpetuating this genocide to be held accountable. But of course, what comes with these prayers is action. Because we of course say the power of prayer is important. What comes with that is action. It might be attending protests. It might be participating in a boycott. It might be taking action you can, being vocal. Silence is complicity. We often look at different awful massacres and awful instances in history in the past and think, what would I do if I were there? Well, you are here right now. You're here right now.
And those that have been silenced, I mean, you talk about holding people to account, and of course that's terribly, terribly important. But that includes people who've been silenced in our country. That includes Western governments who have been complicit in this. And the recent tone and rhetoric that we're beginning to hear it will in no way cover up the fact these people have effectively sanctioned this genocide for 22 months. And that goes for our academic and medical institutions. Absolutely. They've been silent. One example, just I'm reminded of when you were talking then, is our trust. We've got a wonderful ground root support for Gaza in Oxford University hospitals. And back in November 2023, is a wonderful pharmacist I work with set up a vigil for healthcare workers who've been killed in Gaza. And she was refused, and a lot of our medical students contributed to this, and our trust senior management refused to allow that to take place on hospital grounds. I wrote to them because I know them all. I'm a senior doctor, and I thought, well, maybe they'll listen to me. No, sorry, we've got to be sensitive to the feelings of all of our staff. And they've still resisted allowing it. Of course, it backfires because we hold the vigils outside the main entrance on the street, which attracts much more attention. Yeah. And we tell them through our loudspeakers that we're not allowed to hold it on hospital grounds. But that speaks volumes and how appalling these institutions are.
There's an institution which I was working at recently, which had a landing page. This was shortly after the first bombs fell in Lebanon. And had a landing page saying that we'd like to extend our thoughts and sympathies to those who are of a Lebanese or Israeli background, and we offer a service to support those who are affected by the current climate. And the word Palestinian or Gazan didn't feature once. And this was during the current
remarkable.
This idea as well of both sidesing things. Like, let's make everyone feel safe. Let's not have political topics. It's not political.
But then let's look at the double standards and the hypocrisy when you compare how our governments, how our media, how our institutions have responded to what's going on in Ukraine compared to what's going on in Gaza.
The reporting of a single hospital bombed. That was,
The fact that these are happening at the same time allows you to very easily draw these type of comparisons. Wait a second, how is something being spoken about here and something that's actually on a completely different scale entirely being discussed on this side? What is the reason that's driving some of these things, and what is it beggars belief when you see the level of hypocrisy and you look at
the media as well. Look at the way we'll all remember the tragedy of Hind Rajab when she was killed with more than 100 bullets inside her. The BBC, and I've got the headline on one of my sides. The BBC headline was Hind Rajab found dead in car.
And there was that I can't remember which news platform it was, British news platform, where the anchor was saying that the bullet found its way into the body of a young lady.
A bullet found its way into the passive voice to the extreme, and then this idea that a 5 or 6 year old girl can be a young lady. A bullet found its way in.
Yeah. And then it describes some of the Israeli occupation forces as children when they're 17 or 18. But the last thing I wanted to ask you, Prof Maynard, and yourself as well, Tareq, is a lot of medics, healthcare workers, and just people more generally in their workplaces are afraid to talk out, to speak out. Obviously, there is a legal line to cross, and we've seen that with some of the very arbitrary seeming arrests of elderly people holding placards in the streets. But what would you say to people who are genuinely affected but have not taken that step to speak out, which all of us are encouraging heavily, what would you say to them to make them feel like actually it is not just the right thing to do, but something that they should do without fear for their positions?
The short answer, I think they really should be speaking out. I think it's actually, it comes back to what I talked about at the beginning of this conversation. What's one of the core fundamental values of being a doctor is to include speaking out for on these matters. And I really do believe that. I think there is so much overwhelming evidence now of genocide, and specifically the killing of healthcare workers, that I think actually we have to speak out for these people. And I understand why. I do understand why some people are reluctant to do that. And of course, the weaponization of anti-Semitism has been terribly damaging to this. People are very frightened they're going to be called anti-Semitic. And we have many, many examples of younger healthcare workers, medical students, pharmacy students, nursing students being targeted at work, being threatened with their studies being ended. Friends of mine who've been suspended because of being accused of being anti-Semitic. And of course, the minute there's any investigation, they're cleared. We know that's going to happen.
But the story's broken by then, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. So my advice to people is you have to do it together. Don't do it in isolation. Do it together. Do it in groups. And if you are going to speak out, think about what you're going to say. I try and get the right balance. So I speak about fundamentally from the humanitarian aspect. Of course, you can't separate politics. Say it as it is, but tell the truth. Speak out. Don't come out with gratuitous insults against Israel or whatever, because that actually not only is going to make you a target, it's actually going to detract from the main message you can be getting out. And the main message we as medics, as healthcare workers can get out is highlighting the atrocities, the humanitarian atrocities that are being carried out there.
100%. I think it's been incredible to hear, some of these stories that you guys have mentioned. And I think one key thing, just to add on to what you've just mentioned there, is this idea that there's countless evidence that it's a genocide, and there's been evidence of this not just recently. There's been evidence for a while. And while we say people should have spoken out before, you want to be thinking, what would I say I did when the genocide was going on? What was I doing? Yeah. You want to have said something earlier, but there's a Chinese proverb, I believe it is, that says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And so if you haven't spoken out, now would be the chance to do so effectively, is what we're saying, and doing what we can is not just an addition. It's actually our duty and responsibility to do what we can. So I want to say thank you to both of you for coming on to the podcast today. It's been an absolute honor speaking to you both about your experiences. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that the viewers have benefited a lot from hearing the experiences of Professor Maynard and Tareq as well.
I would like to just say, both of you, first I'll start with Tareq. I think those of us who are not medical watching this don't appreciate the level of achievement, not just, in having a place in Oxford with a master's degree, but the fact that with the limitations you described in Gaza, you've achieved a lot more. So I think we have to recognize that is incredibly, inspiring, and people who are looking to start studying medicine are on the way there. Any healthcare profession or really any kind of studies could really take a lesson from you in terms of perseverance and drive.
Sorry.
Go on, please.
Can I add to that? Just forgive me for interrupting. Just to echo what you said, I think the last 22 months we've seen some of the most appalling aspects of humanity. We've seen unspeakable evil, but we've also seen some of the most wonderful examples of humanity, and that's been shown by Gazan healthcare workers, civilians, friends of mine out there, and heroic people like Tareq. And what Tareq has achieved is utterly remarkable with his, and I've seen him at work in the hospital studying. The enthusiasm, his industry is quite remarkable. And I'm going to tell one more story, sorry, because I know you want to wrap up.
No, please do.
But so my recent trip in Gaza, in Nasser Hospital, I was asked to run some exams for the fourth year medical students. So these are fourth years, they've just done a bit of clinical. And I was running and Tareq knows this story, I was running the trauma station in one of Noski stations there for the non-medics. It's just a sort of a practical exam where we have someone pretending to be a trauma victim and they have to talk how they do it. I was completely blown away by how brilliant these students were. Half of them scored top marks. It's very difficult to do that. They all passed with flying colours. I was in awe of them. And not only have they continued their studies and, every single one of them living in a tent with no electricity, nothing, often no food, studying every possible hour. They all turned up. This is maybe think it's a minor thing, but they all turned up in beautifully clean, ironed white coats, beautifully clean clothes.
This is how we do it.
It is. I just couldn't believe it. So this is what they're like. This is how remarkable people like Tareq are, and how remarkable the Gazan population are, and the doctors and nurses we were working with. They are the most inspirational people I've ever met in my life.
I think it's a beautiful sentiment to conclude on. Tareq, if there's any final words as well you wanted to say.
I have about 2-3 points to expand on, if that's okay.
Please do.
Yeah. So, as Dr. Nick mentioned, the students, I would like also to mention the students, medical students from my school who have been killed. Many of them with their whole families. And I know we should remember Osama Abu Safiya, who's my classmate, my friend, who was bombed alongside his family in their apartment in Shata refugee camp in Gaza City. But in the first bombardment, his father was killed. Then they moved to another place and they were bombed. A week later, they were all killed together. And he was buried with his mother. And also, about 40 of my classmates have been killed, many of them with their whole families. And I'd like also to remember Maryam Abu Salah, who was killed during the ceasefire that started January 2025 until late March 2025. During that ceasefire, she was standing at the gate of the European General Hospital in Gaza, in southern Gaza, and she was wearing her lab coat, holding her box. She was leaving the emergency department where she had volunteered for many, many months there, and she was shot by a sniper there. She was in the ICU. She stayed in the ICU for 2 days, and then she died of her injuries. So this is in memory of my medical students, my classmates, my colleagues, my professors, and many others. As Dr. Nick said, they have crossed the 1,000 mark a long time ago. And also would like to expand on something that you mentioned, Ali, which was the water sanitation status before October the 7th and during this genocide. Actually, before October the 7th, the percentage of water that's suitable to drinkable water, was 3% in Gaza. And actually 1 week into the war, we could not get drinking water at all. And my father just got some, about 500 liter tanks, and we filled it with drinking water, and that was the last time we got drinking water. And that was before October the 7th and the early days into the war. And this is just one example of the horrific situations that's just beside the bombardment and the continuous killing and into pieces and into body parts and into dust, actually, because sometimes you cannot even find people who are killed in the same building. Many of the injuries and the martyrs that we receive at the hospital at a massively high scale are either from the neighbors of the house that gets bombed. So you rarely get martyrs and injured people from the same house that was bombed, because they are trying new weapons and new rockets on us. We actually have we are experts in rockets science, because we know the type of the rocket that's coming in from the sound of it. And we say if you hear the rocket, you're not the one that's being targeted, because if you hear the rocket, you're safe. Something like this that we say, and we know many rockets, and the rockets that they have been using during this genocide are completely new, and they turn everything into dust. They don't make holes even, because in 2014 we went back to our house after the 52 days, and we saw our house was surrounded by massively huge holes in the ground with like about 20 meters deep and maybe 15 meters wide ground holes in the ground, and many grenades and so on at the house. So what's happening in this genocide is completely new. They are trying new weapons on us. Something that I wanted to say, and something else that I would like to expand on as well, if you have
Please.
is that about the water sanitation. I also wanted to mention, because if any of the audience could help, because I've been trying. I evacuated in January 2024, and then went to Egypt, stayed there for 8 months, and then I went to Serbia, and from Serbia I came to the UK, legally of course. And then I evacuated my mother and my brother, and I have my father, my sister, I have 2 children, her husband, and I left in Gaza. And I've been trying since May 2024, when the border closed, been trying till now to evacuate them, but I couldn't. And I've tried about many times, and I've been scammed also like 3 or 4 times for this. And I hope some route opens, and anyone from the audience, if he knows any route to evacuate them, that would be great. And my last attempt was about 2 days ago, and it did not happen. They were prepared with their bags and so on to leave, but it did not happen. It was also a scam. And also something I wanted to expand on about the medical students as well. Because of the medical students, they have evacuated, because this is something about medical education, which is something I've been extensively working on and being part of, which is the medical degree continuation for medical students from Gaza who have been evacuated and who have left Gaza. And we have many projects that have been established for the students, and we have all displaced medical students from Gaza are now currently placed in Pakistan, South Africa, and Turkey, and Egypt, and we have 4 only in the UK. And so we have many efforts that have been implemented to help medical students complete their degrees abroad. And this is something that's really good to acknowledge in this podcast.
I think there's a few things to unpack there. I mean, I don't want to expand too much because
we'll talk
we'll
about
hours.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask about Oxbow for sure. Yeah. But I just wanted to reiterate to our viewers that you've mentioned, very casually, as if it's a normal thing, which I guess unfortunately it is, that there was a friend of yours who was deliberately targeted during a ceasefire. I think that's really important to reiterate. And, we talk about the whole deliberate nature of this. You can't snipe someone accidentally.
Yeah.
You can't snipe someone wearing a lab coat, a clear sign of being a healthcare worker or a scientist of some kind, without knowing what you're doing, These are just things for you guys at home to listen to and just use as arguments, as proof when someone comes and asks you why you're pro-Palestine, or someone's telling you stuff that isn't true. During a ceasefire, clearly displaying a sign of being a healthcare worker. Being sniped, not an arbitrary, this collateral, this was a deliberate target.
It was really important. But humanitarian workers have mentioned children systematically shot in certain areas of their body, depending on what day it is. Even.
And Dr. Nick explained that in his latest interview.
Yeah. I've witnessed that extensively. And
one day you'd see patients.
So one day there'd be patients coming in with young teenage boys. The very first one I saw was a 12-year-old boy shot by an Israeli soldier as a GHF food distribution point. He died on the operating table because the bullet had transected his aorta and damaged his heart as well. And then I started hearing about these patterns. And then I witnessed these patterns of kids coming in, one day gunshot wounds to the head and neck. Hightam, a good friend of mine who's an ER doctor in Nassau, described one day when they had 19 young teenage boys all shot in the head or neck, most of them dead. Some days chest, some days abdomen. One day there were 4 young teenage boys brought in, all of whom had been shot in the testicles. So the clustering of injuries, the pattern of injuries was so striking, it was clearly beyond coincidence. And it was seen to be a game of target practice.
For people to say that this isn't not just, it's clearly deliberate, but not just deliberate, it's some of the most evil acts you can imagine in history. it's unbelievable. It's incredibly difficult to even talk about.
And something also related to that I would like to expand on, which is the scale of injuries that we were receiving in the hospital. I worked in the emergency department of Al-Aqsa Hospital for 800 working hours during the genocide, and the difference, the scale of injuries that we received every night, we received about like 300 injuries every night or every day, and only for an emergency department that has only 21 beds. That's including the 3 beds in the resuscitation unit. That's not enough, of course, for 300 injuries as an average. No hospital in the world can handle one night of the injuries that we received at Al-Aqsa Hospital, the emergency department. And that hospital started being responsible and giving care for about 1 million of the population after the evacuation from northern Gaza. So that's a scale that was huge. So an example of that as well. Before the genocide, as I told you, my mentor in the emergency department has just received his post 2 or 3 months before the genocide, and he told me that before the genocide, we were only like every 2 or 3 months we would give only like 3 or 4 chest tubes. And chest tube for medically illiterate audience, it's a tube that you put into the lung when the 2 layers of the lung are filled either with air, fluid, or blood in trauma settings. And the chest tubes that we were giving into during the genocide were about, I counted many times, were about like 25 to 35 chest tubes every single night. And many of them were not working, were not functioning very well because we had patients on the ground, and you need gravity for the chest tube to work. So that's just an example, very simple example. It's not simple, just simple, relatively simple example of how the scale that our hospitals are dealing with right now.
The scale plus the lack of resources.
Yeah, lack of resources and the scale of injuries and the type and the patterns, as Dr. Nick said, and as well as that all 36 hospitals of Gaza have been bombed. All of them. Al-Aqsa Hospital, which is the least one that got bombed. Al-Aqsa Hospital got burnt and destroyed and bombed eight times so far.
One of the surgical resident I was working with at NASA recently was a wonderful doctor called Mohammed Oko, who was a 3rd-year surgical resident. Prior to October the 7th, he'd opened and closed, I think, 3 laparotomies. In the 22 months since then, he's done, I think he said it was 290 trauma laparotomies. It's incredible, isn't it?
Breathtaking numbers, and not in a good way, yeah. Do you have some time to talk about Oxbow? A few minutes? Is that all right? Yeah. So, I mean, intern, whichever of you wants to start, it'd be great to hear about Oxbow for those of you who don't know what it is, what the initiative is from your side as kind of creator, organizer, how you got involved on the Palestinian side, and how you're taking it here.
Shall I start off? I mean, Tareq will tell much more about what Oxbow's doing now. So Oxbow started, I think it was about 2008 or 9. I started going to the West Bank, and one of the first trips we went on, I think it was 2008 or 2009, we took 2 medical students called Tanya Haj Hassan, 3 medical students, Tanya Haj Hassan, Omar Abdulmanan, and Imran, and I've forgotten Imran's surname, I'm afraid. And they were 6th-year medical students in Oxford. They had been students of mine. They were passionate about Palestine. They came out with us. And they set up, and I think it was Omar and Tanya set up Oxpals then, which was a sort of online platform for teaching medical students in Palestine. And the idea behind it was going to be run by medical students for medical students with help from doctors teaching, but basically them. And it sort of it was wonderful. It sort of went very quiet, and it was resurrected several years ago, 2018, and it's just transformed. I'm going to hand over to Tareq now because he knows much more about it now.
Thank you, Dr. Nick. So I applied to be an ambassador to Al-Azhar, for Oxford, to Al-Azhar University in Gaza in late 2021, and I was accepted as the ambassador in 2022. 6 months as an ambassador, I got promoted to be part of the steering committee as the collaboration lead and the Gaza lead of Oxford, and I've been working in that position for about 3 years, and overall just under 4 years in Oxford overall. And I will be running for director in the next few weeks, inshallah. Oxbel is a student-led organization that's doing marvelous work at the moment. And it's not only, so mainly, and the majority of the work of Oxbel was online the past few weeks, but we've been expanding our work on the ground, where we are hosting summer school in Oxford for Palestinian medical students from the West Bank and from Gaza. And we have our 3rd annual summer school happening this September for 30 students from the West Bank and from Gaza. 6 students from Gaza would be with us for the summer school. And at the moment, we have 6 students for the final stage of the surgical competitions of Oxbel, which was started a year ago. And many students went through many stages of the surgical competition. They learned basic surgical skills. They had access on a very good surgical database. And then we have the finalists here in Oxford at the moment. They are doing a surgical placement, and they will be having their finale in a few days. And also we provide many courses. The latest we provided were Obs and Gynae courses. We provided trauma courses. We provided trauma lectures over the past year. So it was a whole course over the span of 1 year on multiple aspects of trauma from multiple delivered by many doctors from different countries as well, especially from the UK. And this trauma course was very needed, highly needed from Gazan students, given the circumstances they are operating in as well. And we have many other courses in research as well. And we complemented a research conference in March 2022, and we are also organizing another conference. We just started organizing for another conference, research conference.
Wow.
So yeah, the work Oxbel is doing is marvelous, actually, and I believe more we should shed the light more on Oxbel and the work they are doing in Oxford.
Absolutely, and I mean, we will definitely get some contact information, some links and stuff from yourselves and disseminate it, because I think it's a great project.
Brilliant.
It was amazing to hear from you both, and I think we've mentioned some actions that people in the audience as well can take if they feel that they perhaps haven't done enough, and I think it's been incredible to hear some of these stories, some of these initiatives that you guys have worked on. And one key overarching message I think we all want to take from this is that Palestine as a people, as a land, it will never die. Palestine, you can't crush a people who are free. So I think let's all, of course, continue praying for peace and justice, praying for the people of Palestine, but also taking action, whatever action we can do. So I'd like to thank you both so much for coming on and speaking with us today. Absolutely incredible stories from both of you, and really, really interesting points for us to reflect on. So thank you once again, and thank you everyone for listening and tuning in to this latest episode of Veritas Podcast, the podcast where truth is given a voice.